I never imagined my voice would echo across the entire town of Willow Creek, carried by the static hum of a late-night radio show. I never imagined I'd become the kind of woman who writes a letter knowing it would be read aloud to strangers, knowing the one man she hated and loved in equal measure would be listening with his jaw clenched and his pride burning. But that night, something inside me snapped. Or maybe snapped isn't the right word. Maybe it awakened. It was just past midnight when I sat alone in my living room, the old lamp flickering like it was struggling to stay alive. The house felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves had soaked up every insult, every humiliation Ethan had ever thrown at me. And God knows there were many. I stared at the blank sheet of paper on the table, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of everything I had swallowed for years. Outside, Willow Creek was silent, a small southern town with only one main road, a church, a gas station, and a diner that closed earlier than my patience ever did. It wasn't a place where people kept secrets for long. Maybe that's why the idea felt so perfect. If Ethan had taken pleasure in humiliating me behind closed doors, I would return the favor where no door could hide him. I took a breath, picked up the pen, and wrote the first sentence. You know very well this is your place. Listening. The moment those words hit the page, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. A small, trembling flame, but mine. I wrote slowly at first, unsure if I was confessing my pain or carving a wound open on purpose. But the more I wrote, the more the dam inside me cracked. Rage, love, shame, longing, every emotion twisted together like barbed wire tightening around my ribs. For years, I had let Ethan's voice drown out mine. That night, I decided my voice would be the one he could not escape. I wasn't the type of woman who listened to radio shows. My days were spent working at the small bakery on Maple Street, and my nights were spent trying not to cry loud enough for the neighbors to hear. But for some reason, the song that saved my life, a local radio program where people sent letters and dedications, had always felt like a refuge for broken souls, a place where stories weren't dismissed or mocked, a place where pain turned into something almost poetic. I needed that. So I wrote, and I wrote. Every memory I had tried to bury crawled back to the surface, demanding to be heard. I wrote about the Rosanna I had been, no, the Rachel I had become. Dumbly in love, hopelessly loyal, worshipping a man who only knew how to destroy what adored him. I wrote about the beginning, when Ethan's smile still felt like sunlight and not like the flash before a storm. I wrote about the way he slowly dismantled me, piece by fragile piece, until I could barely recognize myself in the mirror. When I finished the letter, the clock read 2:17 a.m. My hand ached, my eyes stung, and yet I felt more alive than I had in months. I placed the letter in an envelope the next morning and walked to the post office. Willow Creek was already awake, the usual faces greeting me with polite nods they didn't mean. People could sense things in small towns. They smelled sadness the way others smelled smoke. I wondered if they sensed what was coming. I wondered if I did. For days, I tried to forget about it, convincing myself the radio show probably received hundreds of letters and mine would get lost in the pile. But the call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was frosting cupcakes at work. A soft, cheerful voice said my letter had been selected, that it would go on air that very week, that thousands of people, not just in Willow Creek, but in the entire region, would hear my story. And then she asked the question that made my stomach turn. Is there anyone specific you'd like to dedicate it to? My heart throbbed painfully in my chest. Yes, I whispered. To Ethan. When Thursday night arrived, I sat again in my dim living room, the same tension in the air as the night I wrote the letter. The radio crackled to life. Music faded. A voice announced, "Tonight's story comes from Rachel, from Willow Creek." I imagined Ethan at home or maybe in his truck. The radio turned up. his arrogance dissolving as he realized the story was about him. My hands were ice cold, my breath unsteady, and then the host began to read my words aloud. That was the night I exposed everything. The night I stopped hiding. The night Ethan finally had to listen to the voice he tried so hard to silence. The night a new version of me was born, one who would no longer bow her head, one who was ready to burn the past to ash. Before everything collapsed, before the insults, the humiliation, the betrayal, there was a version of Ethan I can't fully hate, even now. I wish I could erase him completely, as if he never existed, but the truth is that in the beginning, he was the reason I smiled. And that's the cruel part. The memories that hurt the most aren't the ones soaked in pain. It's the ones drenched in sweetness. I still remember the day we met, as clearly as if someone had etched it into the back of my eyelids. It was at the Willow Creek Community Dance, one of those small-town gatherings where the entire world seems to fit inside a single ballroom lit by Christmas lights that never get taken down. The place smelled like cinnamon punch and old wood, and a country band played songs everyone pretended not to like, but secretly adored. I was standing by the wall, pretending to adjust my dress, trying not to look as out of place as I felt. I wasn't the kind of woman who drew attention, at least not the good kind. But Ethan, he walked in as if the room belonged to him. Confident, relaxed, smiling at everyone, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up in a way that made him look like he'd stepped out of a commercial for small-town charm. He saw me almost instantly. Or maybe it only felt that way because I wasn't used to being noticed. He approached with this casual, slow stride and said, "Mind if I sit here?" As if I were the one who shone in that crowded room. I should have known then why I fell so hard. We talked for hours, about nothing and everything. About Willow Creek, about his job at the construction company, about my work at the bakery, about dreams I didn't even know I had until he asked. When he laughed, he leaned slightly backward, as if the joy inside him spilled out in all directions. When he listened, he rested his forearms on his knees and looked straight into my face, like my words actually mattered. I melted, completely, hopelessly, pathetically melted. We danced, not well, but honestly. I stepped on his shoes twice, and he still said, "You dance like you're floating," which was a ridiculous lie, but I believed him anyway because I wanted to. Because at that time, Ethan was the kind of man who made every woman feel like she was the only one in the room. That night ended with us laughing outside under the yellow street lamps, the cicadas humming in the trees, and the summer breeze playing with the loose strands of my hair. He walked me home, and when he said goodnight, his voice was soft, almost shy. I held on to that softness for years. Maybe that was my first mistake. A few weeks later, he asked me to move in with him. No hesitation, no long speeches, just a simple, "Rachel, why don't you come live with me?" Like he'd been waiting all along. My heart nearly burst. My mother warned me, my sister rolled her eyes, my friends whispered behind my back, but love makes fools brave. Or maybe just blind. In the beginning, living with Ethan felt like waking up inside a dream I never dared to imagine for myself. He'd leave little notes on the kitchen counter. He'd fix things around the house before I even knew they were broken. He'd kiss the top of my head when he passed by me, like touching me was a natural part of moving through space. We'd cook together on Sundays. We'd laugh over old movies. We'd fall asleep tangled up in each other, my head on his chest, listening to the rhythm of a heart that I thought would never hurt mine. Willow Creek is small, and word spreads fast, so everyone knew we were together. People would smile at us when we walked hand in hand downtown, as if we were one of those couples people root for, without knowing why. I wasn't used to being admired, but with Ethan, I felt visible, like I finally took up space in the world. I didn't see the warning signs, or maybe I did, but I dismissed them the way someone ignores a faint thunder in the distance, hoping the storm will pass without reaching them. Sometimes he would get quiet, a strange, tense silence that settled over him like a shadow. I'd ask if something was wrong, and he'd shrug me off with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But then he would kiss me, hold me, pull me back into that warmth only he knew how to give, and I'd forget everything else. That was the problem with Ethan. He knew how to love me just enough to keep me there. Looking back, I see how naive I was, how hungry I had been for affection, how willing I was to take scraps and call them a feast. But at the time, all I knew was that love felt safe, at least for a little while. If I had known what that love would become, if I had known how deep the wounds would run, maybe I would have walked away that night at the community dance. But I didn't. And that choice, my choice, is what led me down the road I'm about to relive. It's strange how the beginning of the end never announces itself. There's no warning siren, no final chord, no flashing sign that says, from here on, everything changes. It happens in whispers, in small fractures that you only recognize as warnings when your heart is already bleeding. With Ethan, the cracks were almost invisible at first. Tiny things, things I could excuse, things I did excuse, because when you love someone, you become the perfect sculptor, chiseling away the rough edges of their behavior until you convince yourself the statue underneath is flawless. The first moment I should have noticed happened on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. Nothing romantic, nothing dramatic. Just me, folding laundry on the bed. Ethan walked in from work, tossed his boots aside, and asked what was for dinner before he even said hello. I laughed, assuming he was tired. I told him we could make something together, the way we used to. But instead of smiling back, he made a face, one I had never seen before. "You could at least have something ready," he muttered, grabbing a beer from the fridge. It was such a small sentence, simple, almost harmless, but it cut deep in a way I couldn't explain. Still, I swallowed the sting and told myself he was exhausted, maybe stressed. The kind of excuse women like me know how to manufacture in seconds. But that was just the beginning. Soon, it was more than the occasional sarcastic remark. Instead of, "Good morning," he'd grunt. Instead of, "How was your day?" he'd ask why the sink wasn't empty or why I hadn't ironed his shirts. He stopped noticing me, really noticing me, and started noticing everything that disappointed him. And the worst part? He made me believe those disappointments were my fault. There was a night, a few weeks later, that still echoes in my memory like a broken bell. I had gotten dressed for the baptism of my nephew, my first time wearing makeup in months. I felt beautiful, nervous, but beautiful. I walked into the hallway waiting for Ethan to say something sweet, something reassuring. But instead, he laughed, a sharp, cruel laugh that turned my confidence to dust. "What's with that face, Rachel?" he scoffed. "You look like a clown who escaped from a circus." My stomach spiraled. I felt heat rush to my face. Before I could say anything, he added, "You trying to look like one of those girls from the bars downtown? Because trust me, you're not even close." I don't remember walking to the bathroom. I only remember the cold water on my hands and the slow, trembling motion of wiping the makeup off my face while he continued getting ready as if nothing had happened. That was the night I learned a painful truth. Ethan didn't just stop loving me. He enjoyed watching me crumble. And once someone learns they can break you, they start doing it without hesitation. His next targets were my clothes, my hair, my weight, my laugh, my quietness, my loudness, my existence. No matter what I did, no matter how soft I became, no matter how much I tried to keep the peace, it was never enough. "Your hair looks like steel wool." "Try not to eat too much. We don't need the chair collapsing." "Don't talk like that. It makes you sound stupid." And every time he'd laugh, because to him, cruelty was a joke, and to me, cruelty became routine. I stopped talking as much. I stopped dressing the way I liked. I stopped wearing makeup altogether. I started shrinking, folding, bending myself into shapes small enough to fit whatever version of me he tolerated that day. Willow Creek is a small town. People noticed. They whispered, but no one asked. No one got close. And I, naive, ashamed, in love, hid everything behind a smile that grew thinner by the week. But the real crack, the one that split me open inside, came from something far worse than the insults. It came from the realization that Ethan was still visiting places I had hoped were long behind him. Places like Irma's bar, where cheap neon lights flickered above women who sold pieces of themselves to survive. I never judged them. God knows life breaks us all in different ways. But knowing he went there, knowing he paid for what I freely gave him, shattered something fragile in me. He didn't know I knew. But I did. And each time he returned home smelling faintly of cheap aftershave, beer, and someone else's perfume, I felt myself unraveling. I cried in the shower where the water could hide the sound. I cried in the dark where even God couldn't see me. I cried until crying became my only form of breathing. That was when the anger began to grow. Not the explosive kind, not yet, but the quiet kind that festers deep inside, where humiliation mixes with grief and turns into something dangerous. Ethan thought his cruelty made him strong. He didn't realize he was awakening something in me he wouldn't be able to control later. The cracks in his mask were widening, and the cracks in my heart were becoming impossible to patch. I didn't know yet that these were only the first fractures, that the worst was still waiting. But I felt the shift. Somewhere deep inside me, the Rachel who once felt safe with him was slowly dying. And something else, something stronger, was taking her place. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she looks at herself in the mirror and no longer recognizes the person staring back. For me, that moment didn't arrive suddenly. It crept in slowly, like a fog spreading across a field at dawn. At first you tell yourself it's temporary, that the sun will burn it away. But eventually, you realize the fog has become permanent, and you have disappeared inside it. Ethan didn't break me all at once. He chipped away at me, piece by piece. The woman I had been, the one who danced awkwardly in his arms, who laughed too loudly, who dreamed of a simple life filled with love, slowly dissolved under the weight of his cruelty. And the worst part? I allowed it. Not because I was weak, but because I loved him so blindly that I confused survival with devotion. Every morning, I woke up already rehearsing ways to avoid upsetting him. I'd study his expression the moment he shuffled into the kitchen. Was he in a good mood? Was his jaw tight? Were his eyes cold? I adjusted myself according to the man who walked through that door, as if I were a radio dialing itself to whatever frequency he demanded. My days became a collection of small fears. If I cooked too much, he mocked my portions. If I cooked too little, he accused me of being lazy. If I wore something simple, he said I looked sloppy. If I dressed up, he accused me of trying to get attention from other men. Every version of me was wrong, except the one that kept quiet. I turned myself into silence. At work, people noticed the change. The customers at the bakery stopped hearing my usual cheerful good morning. My coworkers asked if everything was all right, but I always smiled and said yes. Because when you're being emotionally destroyed at home, the last thing you want is for the world to see the ruins. I hid the tears. I hid the shame. I hid myself. Ethan had this uncanny ability to make me believe I deserved everything he threw at me. I began to internalize his insults as truths. My hair? Too frizzy. My weight? Too much. My voice? Too annoying. My presence? Too insignificant. I became a shadow of the woman I once was, shrinking inside a body that no longer felt like mine. Nights were the worst. nights stretched long and quiet, filled with the echo of arguments that never needed to be loud to be violent. Ethan didn't always raise his voice. He used a colder weapon, humiliation whispered with precision. "You're lucky I even stay with you. No real man would want someone like you. Look at yourself. Who else would put up with that?" Pain like that doesn't bruise the skin. It bruises the soul. I cried in the shower so he wouldn't hear me. There's something heartbreaking about watching your tears blend with the water, disappearing as if even your pain doesn't want to exist. I pressed my forehead against the tiles, whispering to myself that tomorrow might be better. But tomorrow always arrived carrying the same ache. I stopped visiting friends, stopped seeing my family, stopped attending gatherings I once enjoyed. The world outside became too bright, too alive, too incompatible with the empty shell I had become. And in that isolation, Ethan's voice became the only voice I heard for months. And that's how abusers win, by turning their victim's world into a room with one door and convincing them the key is out of reach. One particular night stays carved into my memory. Ethan had come home unusually quiet. I hoped, stupidly, that maybe he'd soften. Maybe the man I fell in love with would resurface. But instead, he sat on the couch, looked at me up and down, and said, "You know, Rachel, you're becoming pathetic." Just like that. No anger, no sarcasm, just a cold, factual statement. I don't remember my reaction. I think I just shut down. That was the night I understood something terrifying. Ethan no longer needed to yell to hurt me. He had trained me so well that even the slightest flick of his tongue could shatter me. I started believing he was right, believing that maybe I was pathetic, that maybe my tears were too dramatic, my hopes too naive, my dreams too foolish. I became grateful for crumbs of kindness, a soft good night, a rare compliment, a gesture that resembled affection. It didn't take much to keep me tethered. That was the woman I became under his cruelty, a woman who apologized for everything, a woman who feared the sound of her own voice, a woman who shrank herself to fit inside the shrinking space he allowed her, a woman who forgot she was worthy of tenderness, a woman who mistook survival for loyalty. But something was changing inside me, slowly, quietly, like embers forming beneath ashes. A tiny flame of anger, of exhaustion, of realization. I didn't recognize it at first, but it was there. A part of me, the part he hadn't managed to kill, was waking up. I just didn't know yet that those quiet embers would soon become a fire capable of burning everything to the ground, including the man who lit them. There are many days in a woman's life that leave a mark, but only a few carve a scar so deep that you can feel it, even years later, with the same sharpness of the moment it happened. For me, that day was supposed to be joyful, gentle, and full of family warmth. It was the day of my nephew's baptism, a day meant for celebration, a day meant for love. But instead, it became the day a part of me died. I had spent the morning getting ready, choosing a soft blue dress I hadn't worn in ages, one that made me feel delicate and feminine. I curled my hair carefully, applied makeup with shaky excitement, and when I looked in the mirror, for a brief second, I saw a glimpse of the woman I used to be. A woman with hope, a woman with light. I wanted Ethan to see her too. Maybe, just maybe, he would remember the way he once looked at me. I hoped for something small, a smile, a compliment, a soft glance that said he noticed me. Instead, I stepped into the hallway, and the moment he lifted his eyes toward me, everything inside me froze. He laughed. Not the warm, charming laugh from our early days, but a cruel, guttural laugh that echoed off the walls like a slap. "Rachel, what the hell is on your face?" he sneered. "You look like a clown that got dragged through a ditch." My heart dropped. I felt the color drain from my cheeks even before he added, almost choking on his amusement. Trying to look like one of those girls downtown? Sweetheart, trust me, you're not even close. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just stood there, feeling the floor tilt beneath my feet. My fingers tightened around my purse, my throat burned, and I felt the sting of tears threatening to spill, but I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Without saying a word, I turned around and walked to the bathroom. I closed the door, leaned over the sink, and stared at my reflection under the harsh yellow light. It wasn't the makeup that looked wrong. It was the pain, the betrayal, the humiliation, the realization that the man who once lifted me up now enjoyed tearing me apart. I wiped off everything, the foundation, the blush, the mascara I had carefully applied. Each stroke felt like erasing a piece of hope. My hands trembled, and by the time I finished, I looked empty, hollow, like a woman made of bruises the world couldn't see. I walked back out. Ethan didn't apologize. He didn't soften. He didn't even look at me. He just said, "Ready? We're late," as if nothing had happened. At the church, my sister noticed the puffiness around my eyes. She touched my arm gently and whispered, "Are you okay?" I lied. I smiled through the ache. I told her it was nothing. Because how do you explain to someone that your partner, your supposed companion in life, had become your greatest source of pain? But that wasn't the only moment my heart cracked that day. No. The real breaking came later, when Ethan began mocking me in front of people he claimed were friends. We were sitting at the after-ceremony gathering, surrounded by family and neighbors. Everyone laughing, talking, celebrating. I forced myself to act normal, hoping the earlier humiliation would be the last. But Ethan had other plans. He tapped the shoulder of a man sitting beside him and pointed at me. "Look at her hair," he said loudly, chuckling. "Doesn't it look like steel wool? I swear, man, it's got 1,000 uses." The group around him burst into laughter. I felt heat rush to my face. My hands trembled. I stared down at my plate, pretending I didn't hear it, but the sound of their laughter echoed in my chest, bouncing around inside me until it became something sharp. I wasn't just embarrassed. I was humiliated, publicly, intentionally. Ethan saw the hurt in my eyes, and he smiled. That was the moment I realized something terrible. He didn't love me anymore. Worse, he enjoyed watching me break. On the way home, I stared out the window, trying to contain the sob building in my throat. Ethan hummed along to the radio as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just ripped open a wound inside me in front of half the town. When we finally got home, he went to shower. I locked myself in the bedroom, sat on the floor, and pressed my hand against my mouth so he wouldn't hear me cry. The tears came fast, hot, uncontrollable, painful. That was the day my heart broke. Not because of one insult, not because of one laugh, not because of one moment, but because for the first time, I realized I was completely alone in the relationship I had sacrificed everything for. It was also the first day I felt something dangerous, a small, trembling seed of anger. Not loud, not violent, just awakening. A part of me died that day, but another part, one I didn't recognize yet, began to rise, and she wasn't going to stay silent forever. There comes a point in a woman's life when the silence she once used to survive becomes the very thing that suffocates her. My silence had protected Ethan for too long, shielded him, excused him, fed him. And every day that I swallowed his cruelty, I felt myself shrinking a little more, fading into the background of a life that was supposed to be mine. But every rope has a breaking point. Every heart has a final crack. Every woman one day stops bowing. For me, that day arrived quietly. No shouting, no breaking dishes, no dramatic exit. Only a shift. A subtle, internal snap, like the final thread of a frayed fabric giving way. I remember the exact moment. It was late evening, and Ethan had just left for Irma's bar again. He didn't bother hiding it anymore. He'd stopped making excuses. He'd stopped pretending he wasn't seeing the women there. And worst of all, he had stopped caring how deeply it hurt me. That night, he didn't even look at me when he left. He just tossed his keys on the table and said, "Don't wait up," like I was some maid he barely tolerated. The door slammed, the house went still. And I finally broke. I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the scratches on the wood. Marks left from nights we once spent cooking together, laughing together, believing in a future that now felt like a cruel joke. I placed my hand over those scars, remembering how much I had once loved him. And without warning, tears burned down my face. Not the soft kind I used to cry in secret. These tears felt acidic, born from anger, exhaustion, and the horrible clarity that I had lost myself. I cried until I couldn't breathe, until the ache in my chest felt like a physical wound, until something inside me shifted from pain to something sharper. I wiped my tears, and I whispered aloud into the empty house, "No more." The word felt foreign at first, like it belonged to a stronger woman. But the more I said it, the more it rooted itself inside me. No more humiliation, no more fear, no more shrinking, no more surviving in silence. I stood up, walked to the bathroom, and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked drained, older, defeated. But behind the exhaustion, I saw something else. Something small and trembling but alive. Rage, not wild rage, not destructive rage, but righteous rage. The kind born from years of being pushed against a wall. The kind that whispers, "You deserve better," even when you barely believe it. And that's when it happened. The thought, the spark, the seed of a plan, revenge. Not the blind kind, not the dramatic kind, but the calculated, deliberate, strategic kind. The kind a woman builds when she has spent too long being broken. It wasn't about hurting him the way he hurt me. No. It was about making him feel what he made me feel every single day. Small, humiliated, powerless. I began thinking about all the times he'd mocked me in public, all the times he'd laughed at my pain, all the times he'd made sure others saw me as worthless. And I asked myself something dangerous. What if the whole town saw him the way he saw me? The thought made my heart race, not with fear, but with something close to exhilaration. This wasn't just anger anymore. It was awakening. I knew Ethan's weak point better than he knew mine, his pride. Ethan could endure anything, poverty, loneliness, embarrassment, except one thing: other people knowing the truth about him. Humiliation was his greatest fear, the same weapon he had used on me. That night, I sat at the table and planned, not in a frenzy, not in desperation, but with clarity. Step by step, detail by detail, like someone planning a ceremony, a ritual, an execution of the woman I used to be. I thought of the party coming up, his birthday, a day when he expected admiration, affection, praise, a day when the house would be filled with friends, neighbors, and family. And suddenly, the idea fell into place with terrifying ease. A surprise, a revelation, a moment he would never forget, a moment the entire town would never forget. That night, I realized something profound. I wasn't seeking revenge because I wanted to hurt him. I was seeking revenge because I needed to survive myself. My silence had been killing me. My obedience had been killing me. My love had been killing me. Revenge wasn't about cruelty. It was about reclaiming my voice. By the time Ethan came home hours later, smelling of beer, perfume, and cheap lies, I was calm, too calm. A silence he didn't question because he was too used to me swallowing my own suffering. He went to bed without a word, and I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, knowing everything was about to change. He had no idea that while he slept beside me, I had already chosen my path. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I wasn't going to be small anymore. I wasn't going to break anymore. He taught me cruelty, but he never expected me to learn it so well. Ethan always loved birthdays, especially his own. He loved the attention, the noise, the feeling of being admired. A man like him fed on praise the way a fire feeds on oxygen. It made him bigger, louder, more certain that the world revolved around him. And that's exactly why I chose his birthday as the battlefield. The plan began forming quietly, weeks before the date. I already knew who to invite: his friends, our neighbors, the people who thought Ethan hung the moon. And of course, Mark, the best friend, the brother, the man he trusted more than anyone, the same man who had no idea he was about to play the starring role in the fall of Ethan's pride. I spread the invitations discreetly, as if it were just a normal celebration. Everyone seemed excited. Some even said Ethan deserved a special night. I smiled politely each time, holding back the dark, trembling truth that this night would be remembered, but not for the reasons they imagined. The morning of the party, I woke before sunrise. The backyard was already decorated with string lights and simple tables covered in white cloths. I cooked all day. Some neighbors helped without knowing they were preparing a stage, one that wasn't for joy, but for revelation. Revenge, after all, doesn't need cruelty in the preparation. It only needs precision. By late afternoon, everything was ready. All I had to do now was breathe and wait. Ethan arrived just as the sky began to turn gold, brought home by Mark. Normally, the two of them would stop at the bar first, but that day, Mark followed the seed I had planted in a casual conversation weeks before. Take him straight home, tell him I planned something special. Simple, subtle, and perfect. When Ethan stepped through the gate and saw the crowd shouting, "Surprise!" he froze for a second, overwhelmed. His smile spread slowly across his face, the kind of smile that had once made me melt, back when he still knew how to be gentle. He walked toward me, and for a moment, the expression on his face was almost soft, the way he used to look at me in the early days. He hugged me tightly, kissed the top of my head, and whispered, "You did all this for me?" For one stupid second, I felt something tremble inside me. Maybe guilt, maybe memory, maybe the ghost of a woman who once loved him. But ghosts cannot interfere with the living, and the living version of me had a mission. I smiled back, pretending to be the devoted partner he believed I still was. I handed out drinks, served food, kept the music going. I let him bask in the warmth of being adored, let him soak in every compliment, every cheer, every clink of glasses raised in his honor. Because humiliation works best when the fall is from a height. As the evening cooled and the laughter softened, I clapped my hands to get everyone's attention. "Before we wrap up the night," I said, "I prepared a special tribute for Ethan." People applauded. Ethan placed a hand on my back, pride radiating off him like heat. He had no idea. I walked to the TV and DVD player I had set up earlier. My palms were sweating, but my heartbeat was steady. Too steady. The kind of steadiness that only comes after months of drowning in silence. I held the remote behind my back, breathed in slowly, and pressed play. The screen lit up. A hush fell over the crowd, and then the video began. There was no introduction, no sweet music, no slideshow of memories, only the shaky image of a bedroom everyone recognized. Ours. The bed Ethan and I had shared. The room he once called his sanctuary. The murmurs started instantly. Whispers, gasps, confusion. Mark went ghost white. And then Ethan realized. He stepped closer to the screen, his breath catching when he saw me in the video. Me, with Mark. The shock hit him so hard he looked like he might collapse. Rage and disbelief twisted his face as the truth clawed its way into his mind. The guests froze, trapped between shame and fascination, unable to look away. Then the audio played, the fatal sentence. Mark's voice, careless and damning. Ethan will never get over this. He thinks he's better than everyone. Let's see him deal with this. A collective gasp cut through the night. Ethan's knees buckled. He turned toward me, trembling with fury. His voice cracked, raw and animalistic. What is this, Rachel? What the hell is this? People rushed to hold him back. Mark stuttered uselessly. Neighbors exchanged horrified looks. And me? I stood still, breathing, alive for the first time in years. He tried to lunge at me, but 3 men restrained him. He spit insult after insult, calling me insane, twisted, heartless. But the words slid off me like rain on stone. You broke me for years, I said. This was the only way you would ever feel even a fraction of what I felt. His eyes widened, not with anger, but with disbelief. Because for the first time, I wasn't crying. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't small. I was standing. The police arrived minutes later. Sirens, confusion, shouting. The backyard dissolved into chaos. Ethan fought to reach me. Mark tried to explain the impossible. Guests whispered, judging, wondering, piecing things together. And I stood there, quiet, steady, unshaking. The woman who once begged for love was gone. This was the night no one at Willow Creek would ever forget, including Ethan, especially Ethan. When the screen lit up and the video began, it felt as if the entire world inhaled at once and forgot how to breathe. Even I, who had planned every detail, who had rehearsed this moment inside my mind 100 times, felt a chill move down my spine. The opening seconds were quiet. No music, no introduction, just the raw, unfiltered footage I had filmed myself. The camera showed our bedroom, my and Ethan's, the bed we once shared, the place where I cried more nights than I slept. A whisper rolled through the backyard, small at first, then growing like a wave gaining strength. People leaned in, eyes narrowing, their smiles fading. Mark, standing a few feet from Ethan, turned pale, his jaw slackening as if he'd been punched. But Ethan froze. At first, confusion clouded his face, then disbelief, then a slow, creeping horror as the truth revealed itself frame by frame. He took one step closer to the screen, his breath caught in his throat, and then he saw it. Me, with Mark, in our bed. A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd, but the worst part wasn't the image, it was the sound. The audio came in clearly, painfully, Mark's voice, thick with arrogance and alcohol, laughing softly. Ethan will lose his damn mind. He thinks he's better than everyone. Let's see him deal with this. That line hit Ethan harder than any physical blow. The man who had spent years belittling me now stood in front of everyone, stripped of pride, stripped of dignity, stripped of the fiction he had built about himself. His shoulders slumped, his jaw trembled, his face lost all color. And suddenly, the mighty Ethan didn't look mighty at all. He looked small, pathetic, broken. For a moment, no one moved. The backyard felt like a church after a funeral prayer, heavy, suffocating, sacred in its silence. Then someone turned off the video. The screen went black, but Ethan's humiliation hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Seconds ticked by, and then all hell broke loose. Ethan spun around, his eyes wild, bloodshot, filled with something feral. "Rachel, what did you do?" he roared. His voice cracked through the night like thunder. People flinched. Children were pulled behind legs. A woman gasped loudly, covering her mouth. Ethan lunged toward me, but several guests jumped in front of him, trying to restrain him, calm him, reason with him. But how do you reason with a man watching his entire world collapse? Mark stammered something unintelligible, but no one cared. His guilt was already branded into the minds of everyone there. Ethan was shaking so violently, I thought he might collapse. The rage pouring out of him was visceral, raw, primal, frightening. "You're insane," he spat. "You're sick. You ruined my life." I stepped forward, meeting his eyes with a calmness I never thought I'd possess. Years of swallowed pain had crystallized into something cold and unwavering. "You destroyed mine long before tonight," I said softly. "This was the only way you'd ever feel a fraction of what I lived through." He stared at me as if I had transformed into a stranger. But I wasn't a stranger. I was the woman he created, a woman he pushed, mocked, humiliated, and diminished until she had nothing left but her wrath. He tried to break free from the people holding him back. He tried to reach me, maybe to grab me, maybe to cry, maybe to scream in my face. Even he didn't seem to know what he wanted. The police arrived minutes later. Yes, someone had called them. Maybe a neighbor who heard the shouting. Maybe a guest who feared things might get violent. Their flashlights cut through the backyard. The sirens faded, but the tension didn't. 2 officers stepped in, separating Ethan completely from the crowd. They guided Mark aside for questioning. People whispered anxiously, exchanging looks filled with disbelief and discomfort. The birthday party had turned into a battlefield of shame. And in the middle of it all, I stood quietly, steady, unmoving. There was no victory in my expression, no gloating, no satisfaction. Just a strange, profound release, like exhaling after holding my breath for years. Ethan stared at me, chest heaving, sweat on his forehead, his pride shattered into ashes around his feet. He looked devastated, ruined, human. For once, he wasn't the man who towered over me with insults and cruelty. For once, he wasn't untouchable. He was simply a man who had finally been forced to face the consequences of the pain he inflicted. As the officers separated everyone and tried to restore order, I realized something. I had not done this to destroy him. I had done this to save myself. And the moment that video played, my freedom began. The police lights were still flashing against the houses when the last of the guests began to scatter. No one walked normally. Every step was hesitant, uncertain, weighed down by the shock of what they had just witnessed. Conversations were whispered, quick, nervous, as if saying anything too loudly might reignite the chaos that had exploded minutes earlier. Willow Creek had always been a quiet town, but that night, it felt like the whole street was holding its breath. Ethan was no longer screaming, but he wasn't calm either. He paced back and forth near the side gate while the officers tried to talk him down. His hands were shaking, his voice hoarse from shouting, his eyes swollen with shame and rage. He kept looking at me like I had committed a crime that went beyond betrayal. Something he couldn't categorize, something that didn't fit inside the comfortable box where he used to store all of his justifications. Mark sat on the steps, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. He looked destroyed, more from exposure than guilt. Without the cameras, without the secrets, without Ethan's shadow to hide under, Mark looked like a scared little boy who finally realized he wasn't invincible. Maybe none of them ever were. The officers approached me next. Calm, professional, but confused, like they were trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "Ma'am, can you explain what happened?" I could have told them everything. I could have poured out years of insults, slammed doors, broken promises, the slow-burning cruelty that Ethan spread through our home like a toxin. But what came out was simple, quiet. "I'm safe. I'm not pressing charges." The officer studied my face carefully. "Did he threaten you tonight?" "Yes. In every way, a man can threaten a woman without touching her. But still," I said, "no. Because this wasn't about involving the law. This wasn't about punishment. This was about truth, about finally making the invisible visible." When they finished questioning me, the officers walked Ethan to the side, letting him know he needed to cool off before returning home. He kept glancing at me with disbelief, like he still expected me to run toward him, apologize, beg him to calm down the way I used to whenever he exploded. But I didn't move, and he didn't know what to do with that. It was the first time I realized that my silence could be louder than his fury. After a while, most of the guests drove away. Some wouldn't even look at me. Others gave me small, cautious nods, acknowledging me, perhaps supporting me, but unsure how to express it. Willow Creek thrived on gossip. People craved stories more than comfort, and tonight, I had given them the biggest one the town had seen in years. When the backyard finally emptied, I found myself alone with the remnants of the party. The string lights were still on, plates and cups were scattered everywhere. The air smelled like barbecue, spilled beer, and something darker, like the air right after lightning strikes a tree. I sank onto a chair, feeling the exhaustion settle through my bones. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, something deeper than anything I had felt before. For years, Ethan had told me I was weak, overly emotional, fragile, dependent. But tonight, I had stood in front of dozens of people and held my ground. I had pierced the illusion he used to trap me. I had shown him and myself what I was capable of. And yet, victory didn't feel warm. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt hollow, heavy, strangely quiet. Because no matter how justified the revenge was, there was a part of me that recognized something sad. I had once loved Ethan enough to imagine growing old with him. And now he would probably never speak to me again without venom in his voice. The truth is, revenge doesn't heal everything. It only clears the debris so you can finally walk away. As I sat there, the night air cooling my skin, I heard footsteps behind me. For a split second, panic shot through me, but it wasn't Ethan, it was Mark. He stopped several feet away, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped. His face was swollen with shame. "Rachel," he whispered. "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The silence between us said enough. "I never meant for it to get this far," he continued. Ethan pushed you too far. I knew that. I should have walked away. I should have protected you. I didn't. I'm sorry." His voice trembled. For the first time all night, I saw sincerity in him. But sincerity didn't erase anything. "You helped break me," I said softly. "Both of you did." He lowered his head. "I know." There was nothing more to say. He walked away moments later, disappearing down the street like a shadow fading beneath the streetlights. When the last sound of his footsteps vanished, I finally let myself breathe deeply. The night was still. The chaos had ended. The truth had been spoken, and Willow Creek would never look at any of us the same way again. Neither would I. Because that night, for the first time in years, I belonged to myself. Healing doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with honesty, brutal, uncomfortable honesty. And the truth is this: I burned my life down. I struck the match myself. I watched the flames rise, and for a long time, I believed the fire was the cure. But when the smoke finally cleared, I was left standing in the ruins of a life that, for better or worse, had once been mine. In the days that followed the explosion of truth, Willow Creek couldn't look at me without flinching. People avoided eye contact at the grocery store. Conversations stopped when I walked past. Even the ones who quietly supported me seemed afraid to get too close, as if my honesty was contagious, as if being near me meant risking exposure of their own secrets. Ethan disappeared from town for a while. Mark left even earlier. And for the first time, the silence in my house wasn't something he forced on me. I had chosen it. But healing didn't arrive in the silence. It arrived in the echoes, the echo of Ethan's voice cracking when he saw the video, the echo of my own heartbeat pounding while I stood firm. the echo of years spent shrinking inside myself, apologizing for emotions he taught me to be ashamed of. Even now, even after everything, I can't lie. Not to myself, not anymore. A part of me still loves him, not the man he became, but the man he was at the beginning. The man who touched my face like I was fragile glass. The man who held my hand like it anchored him. The man who once whispered dreams into my hair while I slept. Love doesn't dissolve just because truth arrives. It lingers like smoke in a burned room, thin, stubborn, clinging to everything long after the fire is gone. Admitting that is painful, but it's part of healing. Love is not what saved me. Pain did. Pain turned into clarity. Clarity turned into courage. Courage turned into truth. And truth, raw, violent truth, set me free. But freedom comes with consequences. And healing? Healing comes with scars. There were mornings I woke up with regret staining my tongue. Not regret for exposing him, but regret for losing the version of myself I once was before all the damage. The softer version, the hopeful version. The woman who believed love was a cathedral and not a battlefield. Some days I wished I had walked away quietly instead of detonating my life in front of the entire town. Some days I wished he had loved me enough to change before it came to this. Some days I missed him so much it felt like an organ had been ripped from my chest. And then there were days when I felt strong, stronger than I had in years. Days when the air felt lighter, the world wider, my future possible. Days when I realized that breaking was not the end of me, but the beginning. The truth is, healing isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. You revisit the wound again and again until the sting weakens. And every time I circled back, the pain hurt a little less. I cleaned the house slowly over the next week, room by room, not to erase the memories, but to reclaim the space. I opened the windows, let the wind in, let the past out. I threw away the sheets we once slept on. I donated the clothes he complimented. I packed the pictures into a box, not to keep, but not to throw away either. I wasn't ready. Healing isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about learning to breathe around its shape. The shame of what happened that night still follows me sometimes. The humiliation he felt has stained my own reputation. People in Willow Creek still whisper our names with a mixture of pity and judgment. But I've stopped trying to control their version of the story. I lived mine. And that is enough. The consequences are real. The pain is real. But so is the opening in my chest where I can finally breathe without fear. Sometimes I walk past the mirror and barely recognize myself. Not because I look different, but because I feel different. My eyes aren't sad anymore. They're tired, yes, but awake, aware, alive. Ethan will carry his shame for the rest of his life. I will carry mine too. But our shames are not the same. His came from being exposed. Mine came from staying too long with someone who didn't know how to love me. But shame fades, slowly, painfully, stubbornly. But it fades. And love? Even the deepest one? Even the one that felt like destiny? It fades too. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not for months, but it will. Because here is my final confession, the one I didn't have the courage to say the night everything burned. One day, even bleeding inside, I will forget this man. Not because he didn't matter, but because I matter more. And that is how healing begins. If this story touched something in you, don't leave in silence. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. And if you're on your own path of healing, you're not alone. Subscribe, stay with us, and let's walk through these stories together. I'll see you in the next video. And until then, take care of your heart.